Okay, let's take it again from the top.
Can you stop it and start it again?
You're live.
Oh, all right. Never mind.
Audio.
Okay, so welcome to the Diabetes What to Know live get-together. Awesome. Okay, so we are so lucky to have a whole bunch of questions that so many of you have sent in to us, both from the group and on our page. So we're going to have Melinda answer those, but if you have questions as you're listening, be sure to post them. We want to hear from you. But before we get started and get specifically to the questions, Melinda, I want you to talk a little bit about blood glucose goals and what people should be shooting for, the key numbers that they're looking for when they test their blood sugar.
Sure. Thanks, Ansley. I'm really happy to be here. This is very exciting to be live. I hope lots of people are thinking about questions, and I'm really happy for the ones we received. So, blood glucose goals. Meal planning almost means nothing without having some numbers in front of us, and we'll probably be talking a lot about the importance of different numbers, but sort of establish a baseline, recognize that when you check your glucose numbers in the morning, they should ideally be between, say, 80 and 130. Now, keep in mind that everybody's goals might be a little different, but for most people, between 80 and 130 is a good before meal or fasting number. And then if you're checking 2 hours after a meal, the goal is for that to be less than 180. And some of you might even be guided to check before bed, so after dinner and, before you go to bed. And the goal for then is to be like between 90 and 150, something like that. So it's good to keep those goals in mind. And as you're analyzing, if you're keeping food records, you can be looking at what you're eating and comparing it to the glucose numbers that you have. So
that's so helpful, I think, just to kind of set a baseline.
Yeah.
And I want to say just quickly, we've been delighted to see all the before and after photos in all of the groups that we're watching. And it's really wonderful to see how much success folks are having. And I think in large part, they're having that success because of the food choices they're making and trying to be healthier. So I think a lot of these questions reflect that desire that people really, do want to try to figure out, how can I be as healthy as I possibly can be? So we're going to just jump in here, if that's good with you. Sure. Our first question is from Ramona. And Ramona, this is a common question we hear from a lot of folks. She says, I have type 2 and I'm taking pills for it, but I want to know what kind of foods I should be eating to help my diabetes. And that's really kind of, all right, get ready.
Okay, that's a really good broad question, and maybe a good opening question, and maybe I should just sort of set the table, if you will, by speaking just for a minute about what is meal planning for people with type 2 diabetes. And I think we want to keep in mind that it's going to be a little bit different for everyone. So there's not one clear diet, if you will, that works for everybody with type 2 diabetes. It's going to be different based on whether or not you take different medicines. If you're on insulin, the type of meal plan you may follow will be very different than if you're just taking Metformin, for example. There's certain medicines that trigger low blood glucose, such as the insulins, whether it's a long-acting or more likely the shorter-acting insulins. The other thing to keep in mind, I think, is that it's really important to know what's your key priority with your meal plan. Is it for glycemic control? I like to think about the ABCs. So if your meal plan is to keep your glucose in target because your A1C is out of range, it's perhaps over 7 or over what your goal should be, you really want to have a meal plan that focuses on carbohydrate control, and we'll talk a little bit more about that later. If your key problem is blood pressure that's really high, and blood pressure is so important for diabetes management, then your main priority might be related to losing weight and keeping sodium in control. But if your main problem is having a high cholesterol, perhaps your main focus would be on weight loss as well as decreasing saturated fat. So partly to answer that question, Ansley, it's recognizing what's most important medically for that person. Is it the A for A1C and keeping glycemic in control? Is it the B for blood pressure and keeping your blood pressure down? Or is it your C for your cholesterol? So those are some things to kind of keep in mind.
Well, I think that's actually such a good reminder that, health is multifaceted, and, having diabetes often means having other health conditions as well. So we need to keep in mind what's happening with blood sugar, but we also need to keep in mind what's happening with our heart numbers and, kind of the whole picture of health. So that's an excellent kind of way to keep us grounded. So John actually just posted a few seconds ago He asked, how can I lower my fasting blood sugar numbers? And I know this is a question, why is my blood sugar high in the morning? I know that's a question we get a lot. Yeah. And John, we actually have a video about that if you want to go on our YouTube channel. But that actually pertains to actually doing some experiments. I know some people talk about perhaps having a snack before they go to bed. Would you like to weigh in on that for John?
Sure. Fasting blood glucoses are a little bit harder to control with just lifestyle. So yes, you want to think through the things if perhaps the night before the meal had been really large, or the meal was particularly high in fat or protein, and that it was much more slow to be digested, and therefore the glucoses are still high. Most likely, it's usually the fact that you just are running higher glucose levels and a medication needs to be either added or adjusted. It's not something that you just say, oh, if only I ate less of XYZ, or if only I exercised while I was sleeping and you woke up with a low. It's not going to work. So it's not an easy answer, but I mean, it's kind of the fact. So,
well, and I know that is such a common question for so many folks. It's something that they do, wonder about. So that's actually great. Thank you for asking that question, John. So Sherry asked, is meat a carb? And what about butter or sour cream? So that's another kind of general question, but understanding what foods are carbohydrates and what foods are proteins or fats, and a lot of foods are a whole combination of a whole bunch of different things. So can you walk us through that?
All right, let's do just a little carbohydrate 101. So carbohydrate, usually you think about as just those sugar foods. And I think people traditionally with diabetes know to avoid anything that's really sweet or sugary. And that's a good start, but there's so much else. So it's avoiding, or not avoiding, but being aware of the other sources of carbohydrates. So I think of them as grains and starches like potatoes and corn and peas. So there's that whole sort of starch and grain category, whether it's flour or rice or quinoa or farro, some of the more current grains you see. And then there's the category of fruit, which is a big category of carbohydrates. Vegetables are an interesting category of carbohydrates because they're those vegetables that are so low in carbohydrate we don't count them really, like spinach and broccoli and green beans and tomatoes and carrots, and the ones that are starchy, like peas and corn and potatoes and winter squash, that are high in carbohydrates. And then there's the category of dairy, which is also can be very confusing because some dairy is high in carbs, such as yogurt and milk. Good carb, we should have it. But some dairy, like cheese, is really low in carbohydrate. So people that are really controlling and keeping carbohydrate low know that even things like cottage cheese or regular cheese isn't going to contribute carbohydrate. Sometimes we say, and this is good for the question the person asked about, is carbohydrate a meat? And the answer can be, a carbohydrate is anything that grows in the ground. And so does meat come from the ground?
I love
No?
that.
Yeah. Okay. And then someone might say, yeah, but milk doesn't grow in the ground, and that's a carbohydrate. Yeah, but milk comes from cows, and the cows eat the grass that grow from the ground. So another little exception to that is nuts. So nuts are not carbohydrate. And they are a plant-based food, but they're mostly fat and protein. So how's that?
That's a great answer. So what I hear you say is, so fruits, grains, starchy vegetables, and milk and yogurt are kind of our four big categories of foods that have carbs.
I suppose I'd have to add a fifth category. That would be anything like in the sugar-sweet category, but most people recognize that.
Yeah,
so.
Most people know that.
Yeah.
Awesome. All right, so let's see. Okay, so this is another very topical question and one we've heard a lot of. Maria asks, is it true that the best way to control diabetes without medication is to be vegan? She may have seen that recent documentary about eating vegan and how good that is for diabetes.
And I didn't see that documentary. But, one of the things that has changed over the years, we have some guests in the audience. We're so delighted that you're here. And we were talking a little bit before we started about how the diet for people with diabetes has changed over the years, from a focus on exchanges to a focus on counting calories to a focus on carbohydrates. We've talked about food pyramids and plates. We might talk more about the plate later. But one of the new focuses we talk about now is healthy eating patterns. And in the American Diabetes Association recommendations, we acknowledge that whether your pattern is what I might call sort of a healthy, balanced all-American style of eating, which includes meats or lean meats, or a vegetarian pattern or a vegan pattern, whatever sort of is good for your preference and lifestyle can work. So if somebody chooses to be a vegetarian or a vegan, so a vegan, for those of you not sure the difference, a vegan avoids all animal products, whereas a vegetarian will usually have cheese, milk, yogurt, things like that. But there's no science or literature that says a vegan approach is any better than the other healthy, balanced approaches. So yes, vegan approach can be great if you want it, but there's no evidence that it's better than another type of approach.
So it sounds like what you're saying, and I really like this idea. It's really what you're able to stick to. What's the diet that you're going to be able to, if a vegan diet is really what you want to do and you enjoy that way of eating, that can be a very healthy approach, but it's not the only way.
Exactly.
Okay.
It's really about finding those foods and that style of eating that you love. Food is so personal. It's, as most of you know, it's really hard to change the way you're used to eating. So if you're working with a dietitian one-on-one, they're usually trying to find what are those things that you just they are so important to you, whether it's a particular food or a pattern of eating or the time that you eat your big meal of the day. We want to keep that to as close as your usual and just make small changes from there. So
that's great. So Barb has a wonderful question. I know that breakfast is something that a lot of folks struggle with. And so Barb has a great, very specific question. She says, I miss having cold cereal at breakfast. I'm hesitant to have any because of the carbs. What would be a good day of balanced eating after having cold cereal for breakfast? And what are some suggested kinds of cold cereal that you would recommend? So 2 questions there from Barb. What kind of cold cereals are good, if they are good? Okay. And how should I adjust my day based on eating cold cereal?
Okay. Yeah, that important question, and they really are 2 questions. So cold cereal, many people recognize that traditional popular cereals, at least the kind that I grew up with, like Corn Flakes and Cheerios and Rice Krispies, I don't really like to throw out brand names, but let's just say kind of white cereals. White cereals tend to be very low in fiber, and for many people, they really will raise your blood glucose higher. It's not true for everybody. So this is where for you might want to check, you already have your fasting glucose number, and check a couple days after eating the same breakfast. And if that particular cereal is spiking you above 180, you might say, okay, that's doing it to me. So you could try cereals that are higher in fiber. So I know she mentioned cold cereal, but I can't miss putting in a plug for oatmeal, steel-cut oats, sort of some of the higher fiber whole grain cereals. And you can even have those cold. Some of you may have heard about things like overnight oats and whatnot. It's cold in the morning with milk. But I would just answer the question about best cold cereals by taking a look at like your Calorie King book or your list of foods and looking at the fiber values and choosing the ones like bran flakes, great grains, Kashi, Fiber One, different Heartland. It's not about a particular brand, but looking on the list and saying, which ones have, say, 4 grams or more per serving?
4 grams or more of fiber.
4 grams or more of fiber per serving. And let me give those a try. Now, the research about fiber is interesting. It's not an automatic that a high fiber food will give you a lower glycemic response. But for some people, it does. So
hold on. So you brought up a really important question or a very important point where you said, what happens to your blood glucose from different foods varies by the person. And I know if you're in the group, you know that for some people, oatmeal really spikes blood sugar. For other people, corn really spikes blood sugar. And it really does depend on your body and what's happening with your diabetes. So let's talk a little bit about paired checking your blood sugar before and after a meal, and how really that can be the way that you can figure out what foods are right for you. So tell us how that's done.
Yeah. So it's pretty much just as the words describe. So you're checking the glucose before the meal, and then 2 hours later, you're checking it again. And you want to expect a rise of usually like 30 to 50 points after you've eaten. If it's much above that, and if you're eating the same meal 2 or 3 days in a row, like you're having the same oatmeal or the same, and really, if nothing else has changed, and you want to think about that because it really might have been that you're getting sick and your blood sugar's going up because a cold is coming on, or the night before you did do a lot of activity and you're having a lag effect from the activity on your blood glucose. So keep in mind, it's not just food that's a variable. There's many things going on in our body that are going to affect our glucose. But doing the paired checking helps identify how the food is doing, affecting your blood glucose. So before and 2 hours after, and do that a couple days in a row.
Fantastic. All right, that's so helpful. So we have a couple more questions from folks tuning in live. Rita has a question, and she says, what medication is best for a 6.5 A1C? My doctor doesn't want to give me metformin, and I don't want to take Januvia. Was just diagnosed 2 weeks ago, and I do have another appointment with my doctor. Now, Melinda, I know you're a dietitian, but Melinda's also a diabetes expert. So I'm going to turn this over to you if you feel comfortable answering it.
Okay, sure. So yeah, if you were just sitting here with us in a circle, and I'm not providing medical advice, my first question would be like, wow, 6.5, that's awesome. I might not have thought that you would even start a medicine.
Well, I think she might be saying, oh, no, you're right. She's probably saying she has a 6.5.
If you have a 6.5 A1C,
yes.
I might say, okay, let's just keep going with lifestyle for a while. Now, the American Diabetes Association and Joslin and other organizations say when you're diagnosed with diabetes, you start with metformin. It's just what they do.
The guideline.
But there are many of us, dietitians in particular included, saying, hey, if it's not above the 7, and the lifestyle and exercise and whatnot is doing it for you, and your blood pressure and your cholesterol are in control, there may not be a reason for the metformin. I mean, the metformin is cheap, it's inexpensive, there are really minimal side effects.
Hold on, can I do a quick plug for metformin? Yeah. Because I know there's so many folks who are concerned about taking metformin. They don't want to take it. But as Dr. Jackson, our endocrinologist, says, we have years of safety data on metformin. I mean, decades. It's the most effective diabetes medication. It's extremely safe. Yeah. And there's a reason why that is the first medication that the ADA recommends. So, if you're concerned about taking metformin, definitely always talk to your doctor, especially about side effects. But it is a fantastic drug, and we're so lucky to have it. So anyway, sorry for the commercial break.
No, that's really what I would say. In fact, it is being looked at by many doctors as to be used for people with pre-diabetes. So if your A1C is like between 5.7, 6.4, and some doctors are starting it that early. So I would encourage you that it's safe. May not be necessary to have a medicine at all, but hope that helps.
Great answer. Rita, I hope that helps you. Okay, so all right, this is going to be an interesting, controversial of the moment question. So Kay asks, what are your thoughts on the low carb, high fat way of eating? And this is something that John also weighed in on. He said, what is your theory on eating low carb, high fat diet that many believe is a good way to lower A1C? So I'll let you take that one away.
Okay, yeah, that's really a hot topic, and it's been a hot topic for a long, long time. And first of all, we should sort of say what is meant by low carb. So I know at Joslin Diabetes Center, some of our physicians are really proud of the fact that we use a lower carb diet. And that means that the allowance for carbohydrate is about 40 to 45% of calories from carbohydrate, and at least 130 grams of carbohydrate per day. Now, many of you are shaking your heads and saying, that's not low carb. So I'm just giving you that as an example of how the definitions of low carb are all over the place. So I think what people are probably asking about is the very low carb approach, where it's recommended to have between 20 and 50 grams of carbohydrate a day. So Joslin, the ADA, most organizations don't recommend going that low for a long period of time. Now, the ADA and Joslin both recognize that for many people, this is a jump start that helps them, that can get blood glucoses sort of in target. It might help them with weight loss as a start. So if you're doing it medically supervised, Keeping carbohydrate, healthy carbohydrate, so that's lots of vegetables. And I should point out that often the calculation of 20 to 50 grams of carbohydrate is considered the net carb, the carbohydrate that kind of remains after subtracting the fiber from it.
Another question that's coming up soon.
Okay, and I'll answer more about that later. And it also means choosing, when we talk about low carb, high fat, we don't mean like unhealthy fat. We don't mean, load on a lot of bacon and sausage and high fat meats and things like that. It means choosing healthy proteins, lean meats, fish, poultry, olive oil, lots of healthy fats, avocado, nuts. So I think there's a way to do it. I know it's controversial. Some people really swear by it, and we acknowledge both in the ADA and at Joslin that it really can be helpful for people for 3 to 4 months. After that, it's kind of moving to a style that you can stick with for a really long time, which means having a little more carb in your diet and maybe not quite as much fat. So does that help?
Oh, that's a great, that's a wonderful answer. And I think one thing you said that I just want to underscore for folks is, when you're doing a very low carb, having it medically supervised. And as always, folks, any question you have about your particular issue, always talk to your healthcare professional, because they know your medical history. They know what else is happening with you. We're here, Melinda's the expert, giving some general advice, but, you always need to make sure that your physician is signing off on what's right for you. Yeah. Okay. Oh, of course. Yeah.
You just mentioned something that I wanted to mention earlier. So, Ansley just called me the expert, but I like to point out that I may be the expert in the subject of diabetes, but you are each the expert in your own diabetes, and don't ever forget that. So when you're working with your doctor or your dietitian or anybody else, you're both experts, the doctor as well as you. So share everything you know about yourself with them.
Well, that's such a good reminder. And especially in the group, we have so many people, Larry, who's here with us today, and so many folks who are experts about diabetes. It's amazing how much, people teach themselves and how much they learn. So that's a very good reminder. So Kelly asks, what can I drink that would have the same effect as water, but with taste? I just can't drink plain water. I know we hear this all often.
That's right. Yes. That's right. I can't say enough about water. Water's great. So just one more little plug about that. You might also think about, do you have a really great water bottle? There's so many cool ways to carry water, but okay, you're done with water. I get that. All right. Then you've probably thought about the whole seltzer water thing and having your own soda stream or way to make your own sparkling water at home because it's cheaper. You're not having just a ton of bottles around. You've probably thought about making your own flavored waters by either slicing up fruit, strawberries, apples, berries, and letting it sit in the water for a couple of, at least a couple of hours. Sliced cucumbers, really nice to give it a really fresh taste. So if you want to just buy something at the store instead of making your own, you can also just look at, there's a growing variety of calorie-free beverages. And I won't even mention the diet sodas. They're certainly fine, and some people really need or want that sort of thing. But there are a lot of other fruit-flavored waters that are available, so such as like Clear American or Izzy or ICE. So I don't want to really say brand names, but I do want to say check the label, because there's so many of these products coming out, and I have found myself grabbing them sometimes, like from a market, and thinking I'm getting a 0-calorie one, and it's actually flavored with fruit juice, and enough fruit juice that it's contributing between 15 and 30 grams of carbohydrate. So a lot of these new trendy things look like they're super healthy, but check the label first. They may have 0 carbs, but they may have a fair bit.
And actually, that's kind of, that brings up an interesting question of, a general recommendation that we hear from some folks is, don't drink your calories. Try to really avoid soda, fruit juice, sweet tea, anything that, that any liquid that has carbs. Milk would probably be the exception from that. But would that be your advice as well?
Yeah, I never thought about it that way. I have seen the videos on the website, and I think that that's helpful for some people. I'm a big fan, probably because I enjoy drinking milk, so that's certainly a good exception. I'm glad you pointed that out. But if there is a drink, a beverage that has some calories in it that you just love or crave, I figured out how to work it in for you. So good guideline, but there's some exceptions to the rule if you want that to be made.
If that needs to be, that's something that's important to you.
Yeah.
I think that's always a very good reminder. So, all right, so we're going to take a couple questions. I have my computer open because I'm watching your comments as they come in. So Terry Duncan says, please comment on those who say they can cure diabetes, including various renowned medical experts, including physicians. So what would you say to that?
Yeah. Well, especially there's a lot of discussion about that and publicity from hospitals and centers that do bariatric or weight loss surgery. And actually, truth is that this does seem to, I'm not promoting it, reverse diabetes in a way that nothing else has seemed to have done. We recognize that for people who are truly morbidly obese and have diabetes, it is something that you can talk to your doctor about and see if you're a candidate. We are concerned about the growing number of people that have this surgery that truly are not morbidly obese and do it more for, maybe health reasons, maybe cosmetic reasons, a variety of things that it does seem to improve all the numbers in diabetes so that by diagnosis purposes, you don't have it. Whether that's called complete reversal or not is being hotly debated. Now let's just put surgery to the side. If you, like many people working with type 2 diabetes, especially when you're fairly newly diagnosed, you are able to, through healthy eating and through exercise, to keep your numbers consistently below, an A1C of 7, and all your blood glucose checks are well within target. So one might say, oh, does this mean I don't have diabetes anymore? Yeah, and we actually don't say that. We say you still do have diabetes, but it's kind of in remission or it's quiet for now. We just know that if over time, because it's just natural over time, your body's ability to make insulin, your beta cells decrease, and with aging, your insulin resistance goes up. So we hesitate to say that you can just cure or reverse it, but you can have it really sort of very quietly in the background for a period of time.
Go into remission.
Yeah.
For a period of time.
Yeah.
And I would also, Terry is probably also talking about, there's no supplements that cure diabetes, and that we're pretty clear. There's no coffee. I know there's a lot of products that say, it lowers blood sugar. That's really that's in the realm of junk science or scams.
I have just an interesting story. I've had the privilege of working in many different countries through my work at Joslin Diabetes Center, and some diabetes educators I was working with took me to a market to show me some of the typical cures that people buy, and one of them was in the meat market, and there was hanging from a hook a long piece of meat, and they said, do you know what that is? I'm like, no, it didn't. It was just red and bloody. Turned out to be a pancreas. And the theory is you take the pancreas, you boil it up, and then you drink the water, as in the insulin would get released. That's where insulin comes from, the pancreas, right? So you drink this sort of boiled concoction, and that was supposedly to help you cure your diabetes. So no, that does not work.
That doesn't work either.
So everywhere in the world, people are looking for food cures for diabetes, or supplements, or things to drink or eat or teas. And if we knew what that was, trust me, it's not the pharmaceutical companies trying to squash it down. We would love to find that too.
Everybody would love to find it. So Autumn actually has a great question, one that I know a lot of folks have experienced. She says, I've been set at 30 carbs per meal and 15 for snacks. I've lost 78 pounds. Autumn, that's amazing. Good for you. She said, I've lost 78 pounds, but I've hit a plateau. What can I do? I can't exercise right now due to health. What would you say to Autumn?
So I missed the very beginning. Did you give me any numbers?
She said, she didn't give us a weight number. She said,
Okay.
I've been set at 30 grams of carbs per meal
Okay.
and 15 for snacks.
Okay. And you've hit a plateau. You've been very successful in losing weight. So
78 pounds.
yeah, amazing. That's awesome. And getting to a plateau is very typical. So a couple things to keep in mind is that, and I think that this is a great reminder for people that may be just starting out on their path to weight loss. The benefits from weight loss are not reducing to your your weight that you were in high school or what's considered your ideal body weight. The benefits come after losing between 5 and 10% of your starting weight. So you've definitely already achieved that, unless you were over 800 pounds to start with. So number one, it's a small amount of weight that can make a big medical difference. Number two, I would say, maybe you'd like to lose more weight, and that's fine, but do you need to for your diabetes or your blood? Yeah, for medical reasons. So you would ask yourself, is your A1C in target? Is your blood pressure in target? Is your cholesterol in target? And then if you're still saying, yeah, I do want to continue, wait, don't get frustrated. Be on that plateau for a little while. You have some challenges right now with health. The goal is keep it steady. That would be your first goal instead of it climbing up. I would worry more about just keeping it flat and worry about trying to get it down a little bit later, but just keeping and maintaining is a challenge as well. So I would say good job on that. And it may mean you want to talk to your doctor about changing the medicines, because some medicines, we describe them as that they put on weight a little bit more, and some are weight neutral, and some help bring weight down a little bit. So it may mean some changes in the medications might help you get over that plateau a little bit as well.
Awesome. I hope that's helpful, Autumn. You're a wonderful contributor to our group. Okay, so we have probably about 10 or 15 more minutes. So let's see. Laura Curley asks, I was recently diagnosed with prediabetes. Are there certain guidelines I need to follow that are different from people with diabetes? Okay. So is the diet approach for prediabetes different than that for diabetes?
Okay. So the diet for prediabetes, you've heard us talk a lot about carbohydrate. But for prediabetes, it's less about particular like carbohydrate focus, for example. And there's really great research that was done in many centers around the United States in a big trial called the Diabetes Prevention Program, DPP. And because of the outstanding results in the DPP, and it showed that reduced the risk of getting type 2 diabetes by about 60% when people lost weight, a modest amount, like what I was talking about before, 5 to 10%, and they increased their activity level to about 150 to 200 minutes a week. So that's about 30 minutes a day, 5 days a week. So pretty realistic, doable things. So that the research showed that it wasn't a particular way of eating or a particular diet that helped. It's however you can lose that weight, assuming that you have a little bit of weight to lose. So if you have prediabetes, the goal is a 5 to 10% weight loss, general healthy eating, and we didn't really talk about what general healthy eating is, but lots of fruits and vegetables, whole grains, lean meats, healthy fats, meaning plant fats, olive oil, canola oil, nuts, avocados, and just a little bit less of everything. And so it's different from diabetes in that oftentimes the focus on diabetes is talks a lot about carbs, but for prediabetes, it's not the same emphasis on carbohydrates.
So just for those of us who aren't as good at math, so if I weighed 200 pounds, 5 to 10% of my body weight is 10 to 20 pounds. So really that's not a lot, Right. So just a small amount of losing weight can really help my health overall. Exactly. So that's good news. Yeah. So one more question about carbs and sugar. Susan asks, I cut out all sugar and I still have high blood sugars. Any ideas? Insulin use makes me gain weight.
For a lot of people, the fear about insulin is that it is one of the side effects that people often, not always, and it doesn't have to be, do have some weight gain. One thing that if I was talking with you face to face, I would inquire a little bit more about was you've cut out the sugar, but what's the control on the rest of the carbohydrate? Some people think well, I didn't realize that eating whole wheat bread because it's healthy and whole grains, and I have quinoa, and I have all these healthy things that, but that's actually carbohydrate too, and that will also spike your blood glucose and bring it up. So we want you to have healthy carbs, but don't just watch the sugar. You want to be paying attention to all the carbohydrates, and they all need to be sort of maybe in moderate amounts. So.
And I mean, tell me if I'm wrong, but what I've heard Dr. Jackson say in the past is, sometimes for many people with diabetes, just depending on where they are and what their bodies are like, sometimes diet and exercise will only get you so far. And it can be that you're doing everything right, with food and exercise. And it's really time to talk to your doctor about adding or adjusting a medication. Is that kind of what you would suggest?
That's definitely true. You have the most success with what we call lifestyles, so diet and exercise, making the biggest impact the earlier and after the diagnosis that you're initiating it. If you've had diabetes for 10 or more years and you really haven't worked on diet, it's going to help some, but not as much as the medication alone will. So it's a little bit of the longer that you have diabetes, a little bit harder it is for just nutrition to have a big impact. It's a stronger impact the earlier after the diagnosis that it is. But absolutely, as dietitians and diabetes educators, we work really closely with the patient and the doctor to recommend when more of a medicine, a different medicine, or an additional medicine needs to be added, discussed.
All right, so we're getting a ton of Facebook questions on Facebook Live, which is really fun. Keep them coming. We'll try to answer them as many as we can. And for those that we don't answer, we will have Melinda answer them over the next few weeks, either on the group or in the page. So your question will definitely be answered. We're just going to try to get it to as many of these as we can. So Taurus asks, and this is something we definitely wanted to talk about. He said, or he or she, I apologize, what is the ideal number of carbohydrates?
Sorry, there's no good answer, but I'll explain a couple things. So guidelines say that for good health and for good brain function and just sort of good body function, you need a minimum of 130 carbohydrates a day. Grams of carbohydrate a day. Now that's a lot more than what we were talking about earlier with people on a low carb diet. You're not going to get sick if you are only having 20 to 50 grams of carbohydrate a day for a few months. But for a long-term lifestyle, the goal is a minimum of 130 grams of carb a day. One thing to also keep in mind is that your carbohydrate should be spread out. So someone had asked a question on the Facebook page earlier or another day, I recall. It was sort of like, if I use most of my carbs in the morning, is that okay? And if I'm allowed 150 in the day, for example, what if I just have like big pancake breakfast and some biscuits and had some hot chocolate and just used my allowance? Sorry, that doesn't really work. You need to spread it out. It's better to think about your goal for each meal and snack versus your goal for the day. So as a general guideline, and we've done some of this with the meal planning guides that we've done with Diabetes What to Know, for most people, until you see a dietitian, if you don't know where to start, I would say per meal. For women, between 30 and 45 grams of carb per meal. For men, between 45 and 60 grams of carb per meal. A little bit less if you want to lose weight. And for snacks in between meals, about 15 to 30 grams of carb per snack.
That's a great answer.
Okay.
Awesome. No, I think that's really good.
I know people want to have just a number, but you can't.
Well, no, but that's a good. Everybody's different, but that's a good guideline. And actually, this leads to our next question, where Shelia says, "How do I set up the right meal plan?"
So I think the best place to do that is with a dietitian, of course, and meeting with somebody face to face. But until that can happen, and I'll speak about that more in a second, do take a look at the resources on the Diabetes What to Know website. I think there's some fantastic things, some that I helped develop, yes. Some of the wonderful team members that are part of Diabetes What to Know have contributed to. So there's some great starter meal plans that are available using the plate method. There's some sample menus that are on there. I also want to give a plug for the Diabetes Association website, diabetes.org. There's something called My Food Advisor that's really helpful in giving you a framework of what to eat. And I would also plug Jocelyn's website, jocelyn.org, and there's something called My Healthy Plate. And you can practice by plugging in your height, your weight. It'll give you a framework for how much carbohydrate to have. So those are all good sort of things like this weekend while you're thinking about maybe making an appointment with a dietitian. And you might say, all right, I could see a dietitian. I don't know exactly how to do that. My doctor doesn't really know where they are. You can go to eatright.org. That's the website of the American Diet.
We'll put these links in the post
Yeah,
on the page.
great. Of how to find one. You put in your zip code and it'll tell you where they are in the area. But just because it's a dietitian doesn't necessarily mean they may be right for you or may be very experienced in diabetes. So I just would have you think about a few questions, just like if you were interviewing a new doctor. You're moving into town. You don't just take the first doctor you see. They're all different. So same with dietitians. You might ask, what's your experience with diabetes? Or I'm on insulin or a certain medicine. Are you comfortable with that?
Good.
Do you take my insurance? Because most dietitians should take insurance, but they have to meet a certain qualification and have filled out certain paperwork. So make sure that, if that's important to you, to know if they take insurance. You might ask them, what's your diet philosophy? What's your approach? Meaning, do you have to buy a lot of products? Some dietitians will maybe sell things, which are really not necessary. You might also ask, how many times do I need to come? What's the usual pattern? And if the answer is, oh, just come once, you'll get your diet, then you'll be done, that's not a good answer, because a dietitian, just like a good doctor, needs to work with you over a few visits in order for them to work with you on the meal plan, and then in multiple visits tailor and tweak that meal plan so it really is right for you.
So what you're saying is, they might give you a meal plan and then you might come back and be like, this just isn't working, I'm starving, or I'm really hungry in the afternoon, and then they might tweak it.
Right.
So it's kind of a give and take.
And ideally you come back with your printed record of what you've eaten for the last couple of days with your blood sugar record, and together you look at that and say, wow, look at this, your breakfast cereal really seems to be causing your glucose to rise. Let's see what we can tweak and change. So over the next week, try eating something different, and we'll see. So you work together and problem solve, and ideally they're teaching you how to do your own problem solving, because we like to say diabetes is a self-management condition. The doctors, the nurses, the educators, dietitians, they're all there to support you, but mostly we want to teach you to how to figure these things out yourself.
How to be your own expert.
Exactly.
Kind of come back to where we were.
Exactly.
All right. Last question here. Let's see. We have so many still. Okay, so Autumn says, I would like to know if I'm going to have something to eat that's not usually part of my lifestyle, meaning her new healthy lifestyle, when is it best to eat it? Is it better earlier in the day? Because if I do it after dinner, it tends to make my fasting blood sugar higher than I'd like it to be.
Yes.
That was easy. You only one more.
Oh, well, we're getting into food season, that's for sure, between Halloween and football games and Thanksgiving. So, yes, everybody's going to want to have maybe something more than you used to, or special family treats or desserts that you've been really working hard to control. So the best thing is to plan for it, eat less of the other foods in the meal. So if you're trying to fit in that piece of pumpkin pie or something that you want to have a little bit, skip the roll. But also, as you suggested, doing it in the middle of the day or during a time where you can take a walk afterwards and be a little bit more active and not kind of late at night. So you know what to do. Yeah, great.
Yeah. All right, last question. Let's see, I just lost it. It was about coffee. Rita asks, does drinking coffee black add to insulin resistance? So a lot of questions about coffee, I know.
Coffee. Okay, I like it. So that question actually does get asked a lot. And I remember seeing, I'm not the best, Dr. Jackson's the best with the data, but I think it was in 2007 in Diabetes Care, one of our leading journals, they had a study that showed that drinking coffee increased insulin resistance and increased blood glucose. But when you looked closer at the study, there were 10 people in the study, and I've never seen that study replicated. So at Joslin, at the ADA, most diabetes educators I know, we're not telling people to stop drinking coffee. If you notice, if we did that paired testing, right, and you're just having eggs for breakfast, which really aren't going to affect your blood glucose much, and coffee, and you're going up, and the next day you just have water, and the glucose is up, well, maybe for you coffee goes up. But really, even though there has been, and you probably have heard about that study, we're not convinced that that study was enough to tell people to stop drinking coffee. Interestingly, there is some strong research, and this has been repeated numerous times, that increased intake of coffee, whether it's caffeinated coffee or decaffeinated coffee or tea, all contribute to reducing the risk of getting diabetes. So the person who was asking about prediabetes before, drink some coffee or tea. It's okay. So
that is wonderful.
okay.
Melinda, we cannot thank you enough. Melinda's so wonderful. You're practical, you're down to earth, you're just, very understanding that we all live lives and food is important. So we really appreciate you sharing your wisdom and your time with us today.
Thank you.
And as we said, all the questions that we did not get to, we will be working with Melinda to answer them over the next few weeks. Thank you all so much for joining us. We hope to see you again soon. Thanks so much.
Thanks.